Thank you. We all have times in our life, and we struggle sometimes. Just so you know, this was my first job. I was 14 years old, and I came to a little island called Lanai and picked pineapples. And that first picture up there is what I thought I was going to see, but the one under here is what I actually saw. And we worked, 11 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it was the worst job I've ever had in my life. Okay, I thought I was coming here to have this marvelous experience, but what was interesting about that is I decided that type of job wasn't for me. And so I thought, what are my unique qualities, and what are the kinds of things that I can do? And so, this is me in high school, and, I mean, dapper young man there, kind of nerdy. But I happened to have a talent in mathematics, okay, which was really good later on in my life, but at that period of time, it, kind of made me a little bit of a nerd, I guess. But it was a great thing. And then I was able to come back to the islands. I was a missionary in the Papeete Tahiti mission, and what a wonderful experience. And I was glad. It was unique. We started with a prayer in here. And one of the things I can say about this experience right here is I learned something that changed my life. Okay, and you guys hear this idea of the spirit of aloha, right? Everybody knows what that is. But we know that a little bit better as the still small voice, or the Holy Ghost that's in us. And of anything from my mission, that's one of the things I learned, is to listen to that voice. And why is that important? I think that's important because that has an influence on our lives. And the Lord can prompt us to do certain things. Sometimes we call that luck, and sometimes we're just in the right place at the right time. But I believe in providence, okay? And I think if you can listen, the more you listen to that spirit, the stronger it gets. And all of you can feel that when you're on this campus. There's something special about this place. Don't forget that. Learn to respond to those promptings you get. When I returned, I went to Weber State College, and now it's a university, but these are a couple of the professors I had in economics. I took my first class from this guy Jim Smith over on the side, and he had an impact in my life. When I listened to him lecture, I mean, he would stand on the tables and shout, and he was an inspiring individual. And, I didn't really know what I was going to do, and I was about 2 weeks from graduation. He pulled me aside. He said, John, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm not sure. And he said, have you ever thought about going to graduate school? And so I said, yeah, I mean, I'll do that. He made a phone call, and by the time I left his office, I had a scholarship offer to go to Texas A&M University. And this was my major professor, a guy named Bob Baseman. He actually developed a technique called two-stage least squares. He's one of the most brilliant econometricians that there was. And he taught me so much. There are people that come in your life that can be inspiring to you and teach you things that you didn't know, right? So what drives success? What makes us successful? There was a book by a couple of Yale Law School professors, Amy Chua and Jed Rubenfeld, and they talked about 3 grand slam things, okay? First was the feeling of superiority, and then there's an insecurity, and then the concept of delayed gratification. It's kind of weird because you think the feeling of superiority can be a negative, right? If you think you're better. You know, we sing a song that says, I am a child of God, right? And knowing that makes us different than the world, okay? That is a sense of superiority. You know, we're God's an embryo. You think about it, okay? But that gives us a sense of knowing who we are, right? The insecurity, though, is something that we suffer all the time, because have you ever felt like, I'm not good enough? I don't measure up, right? Those two things together can be very powerful, but the third one is really important, and that's the idea of delayed gratification, okay? Can you delay your gratification? Can you work hard towards a goal? Okay? Can you go home after the class and actually study a few hours every hour you're in class, knowing that that's going to make you a better individual, and that's going to make you brighter and smarter and better? Okay? I always tell my students that luck favors the prepared mind. You can work really hard, you can be really smart, but then there's this luck that kind of comes in there. Okay? When I talk about a prepared mind, though, I think you have to be prepared in many aspects of your life. You have to be spiritually prepared. And why is that important? Well, you have to listen to those promptings that you get. There's things that are going to be put in your path, and you're going to say, that seems like the right thing to do. Okay? I think that's really important to remember that. Also, there's an academic preparation. You know, I remember when I got my PhD, my mom said, are you finished going to school now? Are you going to actually get a job? And then I said, well, I'm going to be a professor. She says, you really aren't going to get a job, are you? You know, but what a wonderful career. The Huntsman motto of our school actually is dare mighty things. Now, I brought that up because I think that's something you've got to remember. You've got to dare mighty things. Teddy Roosevelt said, far better it is to dare mighty things to win glorious triumphs, even though checkered by failure, than to rank with those poor spirits who neither enjoy nor suffer much, because they live in the great twilight that knows not victory nor defeat. He goes on in that speech and he says, the first thing you have to do is enter the arena. You have to be out there. You have to put yourself in the arena. When I left graduate school, I got my PhD in economics, and I went to SMU. And I was working on econometric models, and I discovered something. It's kind of a weird area. I was doing flexible functional form estimation, okay? So building models on top of technologies that have no set form, and they can model anything. And I come across some articles on neural networks and genetic algorithms. I got fascinated with this. Okay, how does the brain work, and how do we make decisions? Okay, and I got into this area of research, and then there was an opportunity to go to the University of Mississippi, and they happened to have, at that time, the fastest supercomputer in existence. It was a Cray YMP, and I thought, I'm going there. And so I applied to get a job to go there because I wanted to work on this machine, and I wanted to advance this area in machine learning. What was interesting, I started doing research with a fellow professor, and we made some advances in the way neural networks are trained using genetic algorithms. And then, you know, what's weird is when I ended up at the University of Mississippi, a guy moved in across the street from me, a guy named Bill Rayburn, who ended up being my business partner. You know, that's kind of interesting. Why did I go there, and how did I just end up moving across the street from this guy? And what was it about our relationship? Well, I started working in this field, and me and another professor named Bob Dorsey, we did a lot of work in this area. And Bill owned a seminar company. And they were doing lectures on the real estate appraisal process and all the regulations around real estate appraisals. And he came to me one day and he says, hey, could you use these models to forecast home prices? And we thought, well, what a great idea. And so we actually sat down at a local sandwich shop, and we kind of wrote out a vision on a napkin and what we really wanted to accomplish. And we built these models, and we only had data for Memphis, Tennessee. And our models were really successful. We were able to forecast real estate prices, and he had connections at the Bank of America. So we got on a plane and we flew to LA to meet with his connections. And they said, this is fabulous, but we don't do business in Memphis. If you could build this model for the whole country, we'd be interested. And we said, that's why we were hoping to come here, because we know you have a lot of data. So they took us into this facility, and it was a warehouse full of file cabinets. And guess what? Every bit of their data was on paper, appraisals. And we thought, man, that'll take us forever to get all that data out of there. And on the plane ride home, we noticed a real opportunity. You can leave it there for a second. We noticed a real opportunity, and that was that this process was really slow. And this just happened to be the period of time in the 90s when the XML Data Standard had just been developed. So HTML came out, and then they standardized it, and they made an extensible markup language where you could create your own tags, okay? And I thought, golly, what if we took all these appraisal forms that they have, and what if we created a data standard? And Bill happened to have contacts at the Appraisal Institute, so I flew to their next meeting, and we set up a subcommittee to develop the XML data standards for the appraisal industry. And it was enlightening, because we thought, hey, all this technology, you think about this. This process is a virtual value chain, right? We've got a service that's offered that's all on paper. And we said, let's take paper and people out of this process, and let's make an electronic process. Just like TurboTax did to your tax forms, right? Except we were going to make it so appraisers could actually fill out a form, and then they could submit the data electronically. And so we worked for the next year or so with the Appraisal Institute, and we developed this data standard that they then adopted, and then we turned it over to the industry. And then we decided we were going to build a back-end system to manage this whole process. And at that time we thought, well, we're going to have several portals. So we want to look at this as different processes. The appraiser does one thing, the bank does one thing, the underwriters do another thing. And we were going to build portals into this view, and we were going to make the whole thing electronic. And we had this tagline in our company. And the tagline was, we'll change the way you think about collateral. Now think back of that thing with Steve Jobs. He says, here's to the crazy ones. We were crazy enough to believe that we could change the way that process works. About 5 years ago, we had a client conference, and we had representatives from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac at the conference. And they were there to announce that from that day forward, every single mortgage had to have an appraisal score, okay? Our system made that possible, okay? And so we basically touched almost every mortgage that went across those portals. We had contracts with every major bank in the country. It took us a while to get there, though. I can still remember the day we first went into the bank. We had to borrow $150,000 to get started, and I signed a paper that put my house up as collateral. All four of us did, and I thought, golly, if we fail, I'm going to lose my house. And it was kind of scary. I didn't even tell my wife. I'm sorry, I'm not telling you. You should not tell your wife things. But I knew she would absolutely freak out. Okay, and so I didn't tell her about that. And when we walked out of the bank, they said, "Well, how do you feel?" And I didn't realize the loan was, individually severally liable, which means that I was responsible for the whole $150,000, not just a fourth of it. But my partners had more money than I did anyway, so I didn't care. But, that was kind of a scary period of time because I thought, do we really have the faith? It took us 5 years before we made money. We had to raise $50 million before we made a penny. Okay, that's when it kind of got scary. In fact, it was that there's a whole other lesson in how to raise capital and stuff that came out of this process. But I remember, about 15 years ago, going into the bank and signing on a note for $20 million with my partners. And when we walked out of there, they said, "How do you feel now?" And I said, "Well, if we fail, I'm going to lose my house." Because again, that's all I had to lose. So, and my partner looked at me and he laughed. He goes, "Don't worry about it." He says, "If we fail, they'll lose their bank. They're not going to take your house." So it's kind of funny how that changed. Well, a few years ago, we had an exit event. We sold our company for $475 million, and this was one of the headlines that was in the local paper. At that time, it was the largest technology exit in Mississippi history. Yeah, Mississippi's not like, other states. I guess we didn't have a lot of tech firms, but there's a picture of me and my business partners. And I've thought about that a lot. How do we get from A to B? Was I different than anybody else? Was I smarter than other people? Well, I had a lot of schooling and I studied really hard. But you know what? Again, luck favors the prepared mind. We happened to have the right group of people at the exact right time with an opportunity that at first we thought was going to be building intelligent models to forecast real estate prices. Our system actually ended up just streamlining the process. We made most of our money just on the, we had 3 areas. We did data, we did the pipes or the infrastructure, and we did the analytics. Okay? And it took us a long time before we actually had the largest real estate database in the whole world. Okay, why was that? Well, we were getting appraisals on 90% of the mortgages in the U.S. Okay, you can imagine how quickly that database started to grow. And on every one of those appraisal forms, there were at least 3 comparables. So we were getting four data points for every single appraisal that we did. So, when I think back, if I'd have realized we were going to have to raise $50 million, I don't think I would have even started the process. It would have scared the crud out of me. I happen to have a business partner, though, that Bill is on the right there. This guy's a rainmaker. I was the tech guy in the back room, and he was the rainmaker. But you know what? The 4 of us had unique qualifications. We were uniquely qualified to do what we did, and we believed that we could actually achieve the goal. Okay? Now, you can call that luck. You can call that providence. There's a lot of different names, but I know personally that I was prepared mentally, I was prepared academically, and I was prepared spiritually to listen to that voice. Okay? Does that mean that everybody that does that is going to, build a $500 million company? No. But you know what? I guarantee you, if you do, you will live a great life. Okay? And, it's kind of interesting. One of the things you can't forget is what really matters. That's my wife, and that's my 8 children. And don't forget on your way what really matters in your life. Okay? Listen to the promptings that you receive. It's actually great being in a school where you can talk about more than just, what you did academically or what you did in a business, but the kinds of things that inspire you and make you a better person. So don't forget those. Any questions? You wanted to leave the last part for questions, right? Okay. It's kind of interesting, and this is kind of a contrast, okay? I went to Ole Miss because they had a Cray YMP supercomputer, and I felt like we needed that in order to build our models. This phone is thousands of times more powerful than that supercomputer was. Pretty amazing, right? When we bought our first, I still remember when we set up, when we built our company, there was no such thing as the Amazon cloud, okay? We actually had to host all of the data for the banks. And the reason why we had to do it is they didn't know how, okay? And so we actually contacted Savvis, which was, they actually had worked with Yahoo and other companies in building out infrastructure. And we actually designed our own cloud system. What's kind of interesting is all the security systems and everything we put in place, that was a lot of the stuff that I designed initially. And we had to worry about how to scale this thing. We actually got help from Microsoft because Microsoft had been trying to get into Washington Mutual, which was one of our first clients forever, because they were in the Seattle area and it was a big deal for them. Microsoft actually helped us to show them that we could scale SQL Server. In fact, when our database actually got up and running, we were the largest SQL installation in the world for Microsoft SQL Server. And I can remember when we bought our first terabyte disk array. It cost us $1.2 million. And we bought this is why we had to raise $50 million, because we had to build this whole infrastructure. You guys are lucky today because you can spin up a server on the Amazon cloud and have it up in 2 or 3 minutes. Okay? We actually had to build that whole infrastructure. The other thing we had to do, which was interesting, is there were some appraisers that didn't want to send their appraisals electronically, and they were still sending paper. So we also had to build an optical character recognition system before Washington Mutual would put our system live, because they needed to deal with the appraisals that came in on paper. And so we had a massive undertaking in order to do that. I think our initial system had 12 servers. It had this large disk array, and then it had 2 giant servers for SQL Server, so we had failover. And then we had to build an identical site. This was in Irvine, California. We had to build an identical site in Dallas, Texas, because the bank said we can absolutely never be down. And so we had to build a completely redundant system. And at that time, the technology was really in its infancy to be able to clone the databases and everything. And so we invented a lot of things in doing that. And it was good because the whole industry was taken off, right? But yeah, it's amazing today, though, because the same power, I mean, my kids have a company that we've been working on for a while. And I mean, we just spun up a few servers on Azure and we were ready to go, right? And so, yeah, I mean, there was a tremendous infrastructure that we had to build that you wouldn't have to do today. It's a lot cheaper to get into business.
For a commercial break, is that
Okay,
right? Just
yeah.
for a second. All right, thank you very much. So how many in here are not information systems majors? Or most of you? So one of the things, this is just a short 30-second, well, maybe minute commercial, but one of the things that's interesting about our master's program is we've made the decision that our target student is somebody from outside of MIS. So the question that you asked in talking about Microsoft SQL Server, many of you don't have any background in that area. Those are the students that we're targeting. We tend to do better when we bring somebody in a different background. I just recruited a student last semester in organizational psychology at BYU, Idaho, and she's doing incredibly well. Her only contribution to our program is maybe had one statistics class, and that was all that she had. So most of the terms that Dr. Johnson is bringing up are probably not familiar to you. But what an opportunity in a way to go into a master's program with a background in accounting, which was my undergrad degree, or entrepreneurship or supply chain management or something, and add to that or complement your undergraduate degree with the future. If you look up the term data science, in 2008 that term hadn't even been coined, and most of you were playing kickball somewhere. And but you look at today, in the last 3 years, according to Glassdoor, it's the #1 career path in the marketplace. And so I mention this because you can start your program, for instance, at Utah State, and maybe I teach at the little kid table, so I'll teach you SQL for a semester, or we'll work on a project. But the great thing is with somebody like Dr. Johnson, there's just no ceiling to where you can end up. And so I feel like, if you're thinking maybe I'm the blobfish because a lot of this doesn't make sense to you, you're actually the ideal student that we're looking for. The decision to go on to a master's degree is something that nobody will regret. And my question to John before I leave, but what I would recommend is you stay close to your professors and you talk with Robert. They tend to guide you into graduate schools. On campus today is the University of Utah, and I would highly recommend their program. April Fossen is the representative, and if you have a chance, they have similar programs to ours. I think there's a little better ring to La'u to Logan than there is to La'u to Salt Lake City. Logan is the lowest crime rate city in the country, and our tuition is lower, and I think our professors are just as good. But regardless, neither program would be a mistake. I've never recruited a student that's regretted that. So with that said, at 5 o'clock tonight, we'll be in room 117 of this building. We're going to provide pizza, and it'll just probably be about a half-hour presentation, but that will be an actual presentation on our program. And for some of you, and like it was for me, it was a complete life changer. My question to John, if you had finished at BYU Hawaii as the #1 graduate, do you think you would have had or been in the position you talked about, the delayed gratification, to start FMC with just a bachelor's degree?
Well, that's kind of hard to say because I went in and got a PhD in economics, and you might say, well, what did that qualify me to do? Information technology. I think most of that's driven by your internal drive, right? Those that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do. And sure, the most successful graduates out of Harvard were Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, and they both dropped out, right? What gives you that drive and what makes you believe that you can do things different than other people? And I think you have to look for opportunities that come to you. You have to, they say it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert at something. I remember this interview with a lady that had just completed a piano competition, and someone came up to her afterwards and said, I'd give anything if I could play the piano like you could. And she looked back at him and said, no, you wouldn't. Because if you were willing to give anything, then you'd be up here instead of me, right? And sometimes that's what it takes. Other questions? Yeah.
How many employees you had at the time you sold the company?
When we sold the company, we had about 350 employees in 5 different states. We actually had moved our software into Brazil. We had an office in Sao Paulo. It was amazing once things got started, how quickly they went. It seemed like forever, right? I mean, it takes a long time. It was 25 years before we sold our company. And there were times when we almost went under. I can remember one time we had an accountant that wasn't paying the withholding taxes to the government. And we got we thought we were in great shape. We had all this money in the bank and, we were sailing along, and we got this letter from the IRS that said we owed them a $1.2 million in withholdings that our accountant wasn't paying, and we had a week. I remember my business partner got in the car, drove down to one of our big investors, and told the sad story. And she said, "What do you need?" He says, "I need $1.2 million by Tuesday." This was on Sunday. Okay, he kind of felt like he could miss church for that, but and she said, "Well, what about Wednesday?" And so she wired the money in, and we were saved. Okay, there's a lot of times like that. Sometimes when you're an entrepreneur, you're the last one to get paid. We had a big payroll that we had to meet in addition to that debt that we had. Well, what gives you the drive to keep pushing, right? You're always going to hit brick walls, no matter what you do. And the real key is pushing through that. And this gets back to Dr. Mills's question in a lot of ways, right? Because, if you believe you can't do something, then you can't do it, right? Don't let that stand in your way of an opportunity that you feel is the right thing for you. Okay.
What are the characteristics that you look for a partner?
What?
What are the characteristics that you look for a partner?
Well, you know what? It's funny because I teach an entrepreneurship class, okay? And every student's supposed to come up with their own web-based business. And you know what I find in the classes? I let people, we have this innovation tournament, and everybody comes up with an idea, and then they vote on them, and then the person who came up with the idea gets to hire people in the class to work with them. Okay? And what I find out is they always hire people that are exactly like them. Okay? And I would say, well, if you've already got an advantage of something, if you're a programmer, maybe you don't need another programmer. Okay? Depends on how good you are, right? You have to recognize your own weakness. But what you want to do is find partners that are complementary to you. But you also want to find people you can trust. So I think that's important. You had a question too.
And it's similar. A lot of these guys are going to be starting, they brought me their ideas, and a lot of them software ideas often. How do they know, what would you recommend when they go out and they're trying to find somebody to build software for them? Because I know I've got a friend, I know so-and-so. What would you recommend to them if you're going to have to go out and find somebody to build software for you, what they should be looking for?
I guess it really depends on what platform it has to be on. I would say maybe you need to team up with somebody that already knows how to do that. Because bootstrapping a company is a whole lot easier than raising a bunch of money and then spending it on people that are going to help you build the prototype. In fact, today it'd be very hard to get funding for something where you didn't already have something that was working, right? And so find people that have those skills. You guys are business students, you're studying entrepreneurship. go over to computer science or go to the MIS department or go find someone that's already really good at that. And I would make sure you find, one really good programmer is worth a whole lot more than 20 mediocre ones.
I guess that's the question. How do they know if they're good? How would they figure out?
I think you give them a challenge and you say, can you do this? It's amazing. I think their drive has a lot more to do with it than their skills in a lot of ways. I mean, because in my class in one semester, I can teach most of the class how to build the prototype. It's all the deep things that are a little bit more difficult, right? But so I think there's a lot of those skills that are out there. How do you know? You see what they can do, right? That's one of the cool things about our major in a lot of ways is that you definitely, our students leaving with their master's degrees are doing very, very well. And they're doing well because our program's focused on giving them marketable skills. Yeah.
I just wanted to close on this one item. I was going to wait until 5 o'clock, but there may only be one or two of you there, and that might be John and I. So one of the things, this is a really special place, at least it is for me. And I was here last year on campus, but if you back up about 3 years ago, we had a student in Logan named Julie Dersch, and she had a husband and 5 kids, LDS gal, and her husband was unexpectedly killed. And so she came to my office as the recruiter, the director of the Management Information Systems Master's Program. And, she really had 2 pathways. One is to really feel sorry for herself, but she came in and said, look, I want to get a degree in the very best area out there, and I know that, data analytics, data science is that area. And her background is totally unrelated. She's basically an English type of person. And so Julie joined our program, and she graduated top in our class, and she was hired immediately by a number of companies, but she ended up choosing one at Utah State. She's the 2nd highest paid person in the information technology department today. And what's kind of interesting is last year, we have 30,000 students at Utah State. And last year I was over in the schools, the little one, next to the cafeteria, right? There's that little food store. And so I was in the food store just looking around, and one of the employees said, oh, you're at Utah State. I said, oh yeah, I'm here from Utah State. And out of the blue she says, do you know Julie Dersch? And of course I'm just thinking out of 30,000 people. And I wrote this letter to get her a full tuition scholarship that we've been close ever since. And I said, well, of course I knew Julie Dersch. And she said, well, I'm Molly, that's my mom. And it was such a great moment where you talk about what is important. And you think about the sacrifice that Julie made for about a year or a year and a half in a field that she knew nothing about, and now is the absolute top employee in information technology, just under the CIO. But I thought, how great is it that her daughter is now over at BYU and living a somewhat normal life, based, as normal as you can be, based on her decision to go after that master's degree, completely changed the trajectory of their family. And we took a picture and sent it back to the mom, but I thought, only at BYU do you run into somebody asking about Julie Dersch when we have 30,000 people there. So I think we're probably
Pretty cool.
out of time. Hopefully we'll see some of you tonight. We'll order Domino's pizza. And so anything.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.